Alright, welcome to the quick tutorial on processing. You'll see underneath this video there is a link to the reference folder of processing. I would recommend that you kind of get familiar with more of the tools that I go over in this, and it's very quickly and easy to understand as it will give you a step-by-step idea on how each of the tools work. For the most part, is all your sketches is what we call them. You could think of them as programs, but processing calls them a sketch. So all your sketches starts with two functions. So the first function you're always going to set up is the setup. And how it looks is exactly like this. So you have void setup, open and close curl bracket, open squiggly bracket, close squiggly bracket. Then underneath that we have void draw. Now, you can create different functions. These are two functions that are actually kind of embedded inside processing. How this works is setup, any code that's in here will run once, while draw is a continuous loop. So one thing that you'll learn and you'll as you get better, you'll probably use more and more of these features, is one thing is how to do a comment. Comments are very useful in that sometimes when I want to write something, I want to be able to put a comment in the code so I know where that's going. To put a comment is you do two forward slashes, and as you can see it's gray, telling me that processing won't actually read this. As you can see it says runs once. Now here is a comment that says runs as a loop, meaning anything in this draw program is going to run over and over. So I will show you kind of the basic ideas of what you should have on every single sketch. So one should be a size command. So size is going to be how wide the window the program is going to run in. I like to use an 800 by 800. And so now I'll quickly go over what we call this. Size is what the command we use. And inside this command we have what we call two parameters. Some commands require 4 parameters, some commands require 10 parameters, and some commands require only 1 parameter, depending on the command. At the end of each line, what we do is we end it with a semicolon. So this means this tells processing this is just going to be one line of code, and then here's where the command ends. To start a new command, you can hit enter and go on the next line. You also could actually put another command behind this semicolon, but just for kind of how it looks and the feel, is usually I do a line per command. But it's totally up to you. It's your different coding style. So what this will do now, if I were to just run this, you would create a size that's 800 by 800. Okay? And next is the draw. Now one command that I always like to start off with is what kind of background would I have? Now the background has an option. It could have 1 parameter or it could have 3 parameters. If I put 1 parameter in, for example like this is going to treat it as a grayscale, which means this is going to have 0 color, which means it would be black. Now most computer programs run not how your art class runs, but actually how light works, meaning no light is black. Now the most amount of light, and this actually gets back to binary code, is 255. This would be all light, which means the background would be white. If I pick a number in the middle, it would be kind of a gray. You also could use background as 3 different parameters. For example, what this is now, this is using what we call an RGB code. So how much red, how much green, and how much blue. Now there is lots of features out there that you can find on Paint, or even actually Processing has one under the Tools option at the top of the screen that says Color Selector, and it will tell you for any color you want how much red, green, and blue are in it. And so what I'll do is I will run this and then kind of talk about it. So as you see, what comes up is a screen that's 800 by 800 and that has this color that has that certain amount of red, green, and blue to it. So if I close this and I go back, I can see that it's mostly blue because this parameter is closest to 255. It does have a little bit of red or green in it. So just a quick tutorial that if I lower the blue in it and I hit play again, you'll notice it's a different color of blue. It's a darker blue. Now, as you can see in the tutorial, or just a quick video, this is a very geometric space. So it's made up of X and Y coordinates. It's a little different though than the Cartesian coordinate system. As you know, and probably have learned in other math classes, the Cartesian coordinate system has an origin that would be probably in the center of this, which would be probably right about there. The y is positive as we go up, and the x is positive as we go to the right. And of course left is x negative values, and the down is going to be negative y values. In processing though, our origin is actually in the top left corner. The reason they have that is, as you can see, if I make this size different, if we did a Cartesian coordinate system, the origin would move as according to where the size is. This way the origin will always be here. That no matter what, the top left corner will be the origin. Now the x's are the same, that this would be positive x, and then going the other way off the screen would be negative x. The other thing that's a little different though is positive y is now down. So an easy way to remember this as, if you think about it, is the x and y values are simply just distance values. So as I go further away from the origin, my x and y's will increase. You can use negative y values and negative x values, but that will mean just that image will be off the canvas and you won't be able to see it. So to give you an idea, and a very simple one, I'm going to show you how you draw a rectangle. Now you can choose to click on the rectangle link that's in the reference, and you can see that there's multiple ways to do rectangles. But just simply one way is the command is rect, and now this one will use 4 parameters. The first parameter is where the top left corner of the rectangle will be. So I'm going to put it 100 pixels to the right, and we're going to go 200 pixels down. So if you remember, this is the x value. So just like in a Cartesian coordinate system, first value is x and the second value is y. X would be to the right, but of course this is processing, not the Cartesian coordinate system. So this y value is now down, 200 pixels down. The next thing we're going to do is the next parameter is how wide we want it. So let's say we want 300. And the next one will be 200. And when I run this, what you will see is you will see that it actually started, like where we did, 300 pixels across, 200 pixels down. And now we have a rectangle. Now we can do some interesting things. Before the background, we can do a fill command. And fill works just like background. We could use 1 parameter, which will be a grayscale, or 3 parameters, which will be a color. And let's say I wanted this rectangle to be all red. So I'm going to put 255 of red, no green, and no blue in it. When I run this, you will see now it's a red rectangle. So what I'm going to use now is I'm going to use a certain command called mouse X and mouse Y, which means the X value of my mouse will be the X value of the coordinate where it starts, and the Y value of my mouse will be the Y value of the coordinate of where the rectangle starts. When I run this now, you will see that the rectangle actually follows my mouse. You can do ellipses, where the same thing happens. You can go ellipse, and we have an ellipse that follows. Now you'll notice with the ellipse though, instead of the first 2 parameters being the top left corner, the first 2 coordinates are the center of the ellipse, where the 300 is how wide the ellipse is, and the 200 is how tall the ellipse is. Close this window down again. You can do a line. Now how a line works is this will be the first coordinate of the line, and this will be the second coordinate of the line, and it's going to draw a line between the coordinates. So as you can see, now the 300, 200 is staying, but it's drawing a line from my mouse X and my mouse Y to the 300, 200 coordinate. And so play around with that. So stroke is actually how the color of the rectangle is outlined, or the color of the line. So if I change this, just so you can see how stroke works, and I go back to rectangle, what it's going to do, it's going to fill the rectangle with red, but draw the outline of the rectangle in green. So when I run this, you can see that it has a green outline, but a red inside. Another command is stroke weight. What this does is how much of the outline do we want. So we want, say, 10 pixels wide. So now the outline is going to be a little wider. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the different functions that are actually already built in processing. So we've discussed about setup and draw. Now I'm going to talk about void mouse pressed and void mouse moved. There are multiple other functions, as you will see in the cheat sheet below, as well as lesson 3. So mouse pressed works that as soon as I click the mouse, it will run this code. Okay? Mouse moved is if the mouse is being moved without the mouse button being pressed, it runs this code. So I will talk about what each of these are going to do, and then we will see the sketch. So simply when I click it, it's going to make a background which is all green. Okay, so when I click the mouse button, it's going to run a background that is no red, all green, and no blue. When I move my mouse without pressing it, it will first make the background red. It's going to make a rectangle that uses the mode corners. And what that means is now, the next time I refer to rectangle, the first two parameters is the top left coordinates of the corner, and the next two parameters is the bottom right coordinates of the corner. And it's going to make a rectangle that is simply at 2020 and follows my mouse X and mouse Y. So when I run this, you'll notice right now there is no mouse being clicked, hence the rectangle. As soon as I click the mouse right now, it turns green. If I'm moving my mouse while it's being clicked, you'll notice it's not running mouse moved. As soon as I let go of my mouse and move it, now it goes back to red. So there are multiple other functions that are created, and you can see in the cheat sheet below, such as key pressed, as well as mouse released, mouse dragged, and so on. Alright, now we're going to discuss on how variables work. Variables we initialize is usually at the top before setup and draw. Now how variables work, our variables are great to declare if we want to change something as we go through the program. Now for right now we're still discussing static drawings, so these things will not change, but in the next part we're going to talk about is how we get things to change as we go through. So before I start, you will see that this is simply just a bluish kind of background with a red kind of square, and here it is. And that should make sense as we made our size, the background. We filled the square or the rectangle using a different kind of color scheme, and then we had the coordinates. But let's pretend we wanted to declare something, so we don't have to write these numbers every time if, for example, I wanted the rectangle to change. So up here is what I would do is I would declare the variable. How it works is the first thing is what kind of variable is it? So we're going to do an integer, meaning it's going to take on all numbers, just as integers in our numbering system, that have no decimals. And let's call this integer, we'll call this rect for R, rect red, integer rect green, and integer rect blue. Now right now we've declared them as integers, but we actually haven't set values. Now depending on your style, what you would like is you can either give them values down here or give them values as you declare them. I like to give them values as I declare them, so what will end up happening is you're going to see that I'm giving them the exact values that the rectangle is filled in. So rect capital R is now the value of 145. So instead of 145, what I can do now is actually type these variables in. So what the program is going to do, as soon as it says fill rect R, it's going to look for what kind of value is rect R. And you should notice that nothing has changed. You can create an infinite amount of variables. So as you know, when we declare variables, kind of the standard is the first letter is always lowercase, and we are not allowed spaces. So what we do is we capitalize where a space would be. So hence when I read this as rect R. Now, what we can also do is things what are called Boolean. Now Boolean is, these are things which we're going to use a lot in the logic, is either take on true or they take on false. So maybe let's do Boolean mouse half. And we're going to give this a value of true to start. So what this now is, mouse half, is it's going to check what's ever on this side, and if this is true, then mouse half becomes true. If this is false, then mouse half becomes false. So maybe let's say this, mouse X is less than the width divided by 2. So what this means is, when I run this, if my mouse is less than the width divided by 2, which means over here, that is running true right now. That variable is actually true. We don't see it, but the program's giving it a value of true. As soon as I go over here, that variable, is now became false. So there are more variables you can declare, such as float. Float are for values if you want to give it kind of 34 points if you wanted to become more of an exact value. Now what you cannot do is declare two variables as integer and float. So if I was to do that, I would have to delete the integer one. So again, on the cheat sheet goes through different types of variables we can declare. And now what we're going to do is coming up, we'll talk about how to use all these together. Okay, so what you'll see here is starting kind of where we've left off, is I've given a rectangle that's filled at different values, and I've put it at 30, 50 in the screen and made it a width of 200 and a height of 100. So when I run this, you'll see that it's this purpley color, and the background's this bluish kind of color. You'll notice the red and green are both integers, while the blue is going to be a float. Now, I'm going to show you is what happens is how do we just kind of sit back and watch our drawing evolve. So the first thing is what I'm going to do is every time it runs through this, I'm going to get it to change the red. And I'm going to get the red to actually turn into whatever it was before -1. So every time it goes through, it's going to lower red by 1. Now the green, just to do a little different, is I'll get the green to increase by 1. And then the blues, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the blue to increase by, say, 0.5. Now we got to be kind of conscious of what our variables are. I can get blue to increase by 0.5, but I couldn't get away with it with green or red. And the reason is green and red are integers, while blue is a float, meaning blue can take on decimal values and red and green cannot. So every time it goes through, red's going to go down by 1, green's going to go up by 1, and blue's going to go up by 0.5. And what you should see here is kind of the color changing. And the color is going to change, and ultimately it's going to kind of just stop. And the reason it's going to stop is red eventually is going to get to 0. And even though it's going less than 0, the fill will treat it still as 0, because you can't have less than no red. Green is going to eventually just max out at 255 while it runs the fill command, as well as blue. We will be talking about it in the assignments, is how now to use logic, and so when it gets to these kind of maximum values, how to change it. Another one that's kind of neat is I like to use is random. So this time now is it's just going to randomly give a red value between 0 and 255. Now the problem is though with the random command, the random is going to be giving any kind of number between 0 and 255. Notice red can only take on integer values. So what we have to use is use the integer command around this, meaning this will create a random number and then the integer command just rounds it to an integer. And so what we'll do here is you'll see that the green and blue are still changing, but the red is kind of taking on this random color. Why this doesn't just kind of stop is the green and blue are eventually going to stop at 255, but this random red is going to be constantly changing. And of course you could change the green and blue also to random. So going back, so when I have the R decreasing by 1, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add 2 more. So let's say I'm going to add integer, and we'll call it the rect width. And we started at 200. And I'm going to call the rect length and start that at 100. So now, instead of 200 and 100, I can call rect width and rect length. Now, I'm going to show you another little trick. Is let's say I want the width to be increased by 1 every time. You could do something similar to the one above, or you can just simply go plus plus. What that means is it's just going to increase it by 1 every time. Rect length, I want it to decrease it by 1 every time, so I'm just going to go minus minus. And now when I run it, you'll also see that the size changes. Now, why we're getting this black shadow is keep in mind the background's only being drawn once. So if I don't want that black shadow, is what I'll do is I'll paste it down here, and now you can kind of see that as it changes, that's what occurs. Alright, so now what we're going to do is learn about how to create our own functions. So again, we have this red, green, and blue rectangle, and we have it taking on various variables. As well as the rect red is decreasing by 1, the green is increasing by 1, and the blue is increasing by 0.5. As well as the width and length are constantly increasing by 1, while the length is decreasing by 1. But what we can do now is set up in draw, and mouse pressed, as you've heard the other functions, are built in. However, we can create our own function, and we can do a lot with them, but for this kind of basic course, I'll just show you if you want to create a new one, you just simply start it as void, and instead of draw, let's say we're going to call it draw rectangle. So it looks the exact same thing. So now what we can do here is we can put in whatever we want. So let's pretend I'm just going to take the rectangle command and I'm going to paste it in here. So what this simply does now is this function only simply draws the rectangle using those variables. And in here, how to tell it to draw that is simply go draw the function, open and close brackets, and then a semicolon. So when it gets to this line, it's going to look for the function you created called draw r, and then it's going to run it. And so what you will see is exactly what happened at the end of the last one, is that this function is just being called in here. Right, might be beneficial throughout your program to maybe put some text in. So to do text, first couple things we have to do is first declare the size of the text. Now you've done this many times in Microsoft Word. It's kind of how many pixels should it be. So a 32 is a very large one. The next one is we use the fill command to give it a color. So maybe I'll go 0, 50, or 150, 0 to give it kind of some red, a little bit of green, but no blue. Now how text works is text, just the very basic one, is you first start out with quotations in your first parameter and you say what would you like it to write. So let's do the command, or the string of letters hey with an exclamation mark. Comma, then we do two parameters, and the two parameters are where do we want the x and y value to be for the text to start. So for example, I'll do 30, and then maybe I'll go a little further down, which will do 50. And so now when I run this, you'll see that 30 pixels across, 50 pixels down, I have hey. And of course, if you wanted to change the string in here, hey, how are you? Then what we do, again, it will write, hey, how are you? Okay, a little more advanced one is to add two more parameters. Now what two more parameters do, it changes even what these first two parameters are. So if we have 4 numbers after the string of characters which you want displayed, the first two, this 30, 50, is going to be the top left corner of a text box. Then the next parameter is going to be how long we want the text box to be. So let's say I'm going to put 70 pixels long. And the last one is how tall we want it. So we know the font is 32 pixels tall, so let's make it 40 pixels. What you're going to see now is you're only going to see some of the characters, hey, comma. What ends up happening is how are you is actually, in a sense, outside this text box, because the text box, in a sense, would run right here. And the rest is not inside the text box. If I wanted to see more character, I could change it to, say, 200. Now what will end up happening is you're going to see that this is 200 pixels long, and now there's more characters being shown. Okay, and just like other times, we can use variables. So one variable we'll use is we'll declare the variable as string. And we'll call the variable hey. And of course, we'll now assign it the string, hey, how are you? So now what ends up happening is the variable hey actually takes on this string. So now what I can do is inside the text box here, and I'll bring it back to the basic text box, is the first parameter is what you want it to say, hey. You'll notice this time without quotations, because I don't want it actually saying hey. I want it to use the variable hey. Then I'll put it, say, 100 pixels across and, 200 pixels down. So now it's going to take the string, hey, how are you, and put it in there. And when you run it, you can see there it is. And then that way is if you wanted to change the string somewhere throughout your program, it will still make that change in this text box as well. Now we are going to learn how keypressed works. So there is a function built inside processing called keypressed. And keypressed works when any single key on the keyboard is pressed. For example, you'll see this is going to start out with a white background, but as soon as I push any key on the keyboard right now, it turns black, because now it's running this command. Another thing we can do is the variable key. The variable key is actually the last key clicked on the keyboard, and it's built into processing. So for example, I'm going to do a text. So I'll quickly put the text in. Okay, so I've put the size of 32, the fill is red, and what I'm going to do is, just as a review, I'll start with the letter hey, or the word hey, and I'll put it 300 and maybe 100 down, and so we can see what it starts out with is this big hey. However, what we can do is, instead of writing hey, we put in key. Now you'll notice key turns red. It is a variable built in. Now, because I want it to draw the background every time, so I don't see multiple keys, I'm going to write the background in here. So this is what's going to happen. It will draw the white background, then it's going to get a text size of 32, red, and type in the last key I pushed. So when I push A, now I'll push D, W, O, P, L. And so what ends up happening is that this actually registers the last key that is pressed on the keyboard. Since we haven't covered everything, I invite you at the top of the screen, if you click on Help and click in Find and Reference, what will end up happening is it will take you to a screen which will show you all the references. And what I would invite you to do is to look at these and see is what you can do. Points, quads, rectangles, triangles, arcs, these are shapes. So I want you to draw a picture just so you get the idea of it, and then what we're going to do is we're going to embed our learning of logic inside this command of processing.